Is the announcements. We're starting back into the book of James, inside out. Once again, the book of James is writing, once again, we'll just kind of hit some of the history of it. James is the brother of the Lord. He was the head honch of the church in Jerusalem. He's writing this letter to churches that were formed by Christians that, because of persecution in the city of Jerusalem, had left and they had dispersed. All the persecution that the Bible talks about that arose after Stephen at the hands of he wasn't the Apostle Paul at the time, he was Saul of Tarsus. He helped, they stoned Stephen to death, called him a heretic and everything else. And as a result of that, it became open season on Christians. So they really began to persecute them, try to hunt them down, kill them. Matter of fact, the Apostle Paul, he came to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. In one of those episodes, he was heading to Tarsus in order to arrest some Christians, and on the way there, he had a miraculous encounter with Jesus, and his life was never the same, to the point that he wrote most of the New Testament that we have today. But James decided to write this book. He was writing it to all the Christians. They were Jewish Christians primarily that had scattered abroad because of that persecution. He's writing them as the head of the church in Jerusalem to encourage them. We talked about that before when we first started the first night when we started this book. So he is trying to encourage them, and it's interesting, he's encouraging them, but James himself died a martyr's death. He was taken up and he was thrown off the high tower of the temple and fell to his death. That's how he was martyred for the Lord. So he's trying to communicate to these people and say, hey, look, I get it. You're serving Jesus Christ. You're not popular with the Jews. The Romans hate you. So everybody's after you, but you still have got to live a life that brings glory to God. Is basically what he's trying to get them to understand. And what he's trying to get them also, and he gets a little bit more into it as we get going tonight, in chapter 2. He's trying to get them to understand the fact that doing good things isn't what makes you a Christian. Being a Christian is what brings you to a point of doing good things, okay? It's not, you don't want to get the cart before the horse, because there's way too much, and all throughout church history there's been this stuff of, well, if you do good things to be a Christian. If I do enough good stuff, God will like me, and I'll get to go to heaven, and I won't spend eternity in hell, and all those kinds of things. So James is, and it was still pretty prevalent, or else he wouldn't be writing about it. James, in this chapter especially, he begins to dig in, and he begins to talk about what does it look like to be a Christian. What does that look like? So what I want to ask you guys, before we even get started with this, I want to throw that question out to you. What does it look, and don't anybody say, to look like Jesus. Okay, that's cop-out. Okay, what does being a Christian look like? Pardon me?
Compassion.
Compassion, okay. Somebody else? What?
Servanthood.
Servanthood, okay. What does that mean?
You're here to serve people and be an example for Christ.
You're here to serve people and be an example for Christ, okay. What else? What else?
Good character.
Good character? How would you describe that, Ginger?
Biblical character.
Biblical character. Okay, if you were...
The Ten Commandments.
The Ten Commandments? Okay. Possibly. I don't know if the Ten Commandments were really being taught and lived out in the way that they were originally intended at this particular point in time in history. But
Not legalistically, but...
Okay.
Not legalistically the Ten Commandments, but, you don't steal, you're honest. You respect... There's respect for your fellow man or woman or child.
Okay. So, let me ask you this. How do you deal with, because you have a lot of people, and I'm sure in this day, or else James would not have even been addressing it, that you have a lot of people that think, well, if I'm good, and if I do good things, that means I'm okay with God. And what James is getting ready to show them is that no, what you do should be an outgrowth already of what you are and who you are in Jesus. What you do doesn't make you a Christian, but being a Christian you should develop these character traits, is what he's really
It's the
saying.
Sermon on the Mount.
Pardon me?
It's the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, in a sense it is. In a very real sense it is. That Jesus is saying, hey, he uses this phrase a lot in the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard that it was said by them of old time. Now that's King James Version. But you've heard that it was said by the leaders of old time that this is what you're supposed to do. And Jesus says, but this is what I say for you to do. And it would be they thought Jesus was a pure heretic, basically, because he was coming from the standpoint of what the Father ultimately meant for them to be, not for what they had gotten turned into. It's interesting. There are so many things that Jesus dealt with. There was one instance where, he tells his disciples, "Look, don't be like the hypocrites, who, when they go to give alms, they sound a trumpet before them, so that everybody can say, look at that, they gave all this money." He said, "But no, when you give your alms, do it. Don't even let your right hand know what the left hand's doing. In other words, do it in a way where it doesn't draw attention to yourself." Because, see, the idea, I always had this picture of these guys going before these rich dudes blowing trumpets as they're getting ready to come to the, whatever the bucket or the bowl or whatever it was that they would put their money into to help the poor. Well, I learned later on that really what that meant, sounding the trumpet, was that the alms box or whatever had a flared brass kind of opening to it. And so what they would do, of course, they didn't have paper money, they had coins, right? So what they would do is they would take and they would make sure that when they threw it in, it would make a loud clanging noise in the trumpet, if you will, of the giving box. So they would throw that. So, and Jesus says, don't be like that. Just don't even let your right hand know. In other words, put it in there in such a way that your left hand doesn't even know what your right hand's been doing, type of thing. Don't do it to be seen of men. So James is getting ready to deal with a lot of stuff. Now it's interesting. It all depends on your frame of mind when you read this book. We've talked about this. That because James can be misconstrued as saying that, look, you have to do all of these good works to be a Christian. No. What he's saying is, if you're a Christian, this will be the natural outgrowth of who you are. Your outside will reflect your inside. So we're going to start in verse 1 here tonight. And if you got any comments or anything, just jump in there. Those of you watching from home, if you got any comments, just raise your... No, I won't see it. But you can yell at the computer screen or whatever. I might hear it this far away, but hopefully we'll address some of your things, okay? Start in verse 1 of chapter 2. My brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ must not show favoritism. Then he goes on to give an explanation of what that looks like. Suppose a man comes into your meeting wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in filthy old clothes also comes in. If you show special attention to the man wearing fine clothes and say, "Here's a good seat for you," but you say to the poor man, "You stand there or sit on the floor by my feet," have you not discriminated among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? I want to stop right there. Do you think that would ever happen in our churches today?
Yeah. Sorry. That was a little quick, wasn't it?
No.
Yes and no on that.
Yes and no.
Well,
Explain.
Okay. Just because, there's a not so beneficial person right there, let's give him special treatment and bring attention to him. Well, if he doesn't want that attention, let's just say I'm financially unsound and all that, let's say I'm a bum and all that.
Uh-huh.
I got good clothes on and all that. I don't want attention brought to me.
Okay.
So I'll sit in the back corner. I'll go in and I'll sit right there walk inside the church.
Okay.
And as soon as church over, I'm out, I'm gone.
So you're kind of hitting on
Trying to be humble or trying to be
humility.
secretive?
Well, it's not so much that. I think you're coming at it from the standpoint of the person who's walking in, not necessarily from the people that are already there. Because what you're saying is true. I mean, it really is. You know, there's some people. I mean, you know, have you ever? I see it all the time. That somebody new will come in, and you know they get here a little bit late, and so all the seats at the back are already filled up. You know, nobody wants to get up front. And so the only seats that are available are closer up front. And so where is the usher naturally going to go to seat them?
And that's when I first came here about 3 or 4 years ago. I sat in the back row. I didn't want to bring any attention.
Sure.
And then she was, what's the one girl with short hair and sits in the front row next to me? And when she's here.
Oh, I forget, Dave.
Girl with short hair.
Okay, I know who you're talking about for that.
She came up, no, you're not sitting back here. Come sit in the row. I said, I'm new. I get here. I'll seem like a fool. But no, that's my cool co-reserve spot now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can. Go ahead.
So this is really hard not to do. Okay, so I think of peacekeepers. You're supposed to look at individuals. You know, if they're suspicious, and I'm sure there's a criteria. I don't know, maybe not. But like, you know, I sit at the front desk at work, and I see people walk in, and sure, I would like to say it's a spiritual thing, and it's, you know, my spirit's discernment, yeah. But, you know, when somebody comes in and they got a hood on and they got a mask on and they're kind of hunched over, you're like, you know, it's really hard to do.
Yeah, and I think where James is coming from, he's looking at the standpoint of somebody comes in and they look really nice. In other words, I mean, you see somebody dressed, and you can tell by looking at them. You know, them shoes are at least $150 shoes. You know what they got on is this. So automatically, what do you think when you see somebody dressed like that? Either you think they're extremely poor because they spend all their money on all this stuff. But more than likely, what is your first inclination when you see somebody?
They're a good person.
You think they're a good person, but also what do you think?
They're financially
rich, yeah.
strong.
They're wealthy. They're financially strong.
Yeah.
That's what James is talking about. He's
and
talking
so
about
you give favor to them.
Yeah, so you treat them favorably. You don't set them in the back row, in the booth in the back, in the corner in the dark. You know, you walk them up to the best seat in the house because this cat's got money. So you want to treat them right because who knows, they may leave a really good offering. Because in that day, people would go to church because they in their mind, they thought that absolution didn't come by faith in Christ. They thought it was by sacrifice. So if they gave this big amount of money, and that's what they would do, they would clang to, hey, I just gave a good amount of money, I'm good with God for a week or whatever, type of deal. So what he's trying to do here, he said that when you do that, haven't you made yourself judges with evil thoughts? Because he's saying that if you discriminate based on what somebody looks like, or based on how they're dressed, if they look wealthy, because there was a huge, let's face it, today you can't tell if somebody's got a lot of money or not by the way people dress anymore today.
True.
Okay? I've known people that were, well, for lack of a better word, filthy rich, and they dressed like, dude, you got all that money, why don't you go get some clothes,
But they spent hundreds, thousands of dollars on those holy jeans. Exactly.
Can I just say something to y'all at home? I'm going to tell you what, instead of going out and spending $150 on a pair of holy jeans, go get you a $1.298 pair of Wranglers, bring them to me, I will drag them on the ground behind my pickup truck until they get holes in them, and then I'll give them to you. I'll save you a ton of money, okay?
Right.
I can't, that just blows my mind. But people will do that. And so we have a tendency, and it's not hard to fall into that trap. It's really not. And James is saying, look, you actually, when you do that kind of stuff, you're discriminating among people, and you've actually made yourself judges of them. Well, I judge that you're better than this person is because obviously, if he had his life together, he'd be more like you or whatever. But in the culture, in the day in which they lived, the distance between the haves and the have-nots was huge. And the system was designed that the have-nots would never be able to have what the haves had. Okay? So there's all this stuff going on. So he's telling the churches here, he's saying, look, don't fall into that game. I know it's very tempting to treat somebody better because you think, well, man, we really need to put a new whatever classroom on or a new sanctuary on or whatever, and we could really use that money, so we need to be, treat this person nice. And usually the people that were that way, that were more affluent in that day, had connections governmentally. Okay? They had connections governmentally. And so, hey, if we can get some connections with the right people, maybe we, all this kind of stuff. But James is saying, look, here's what being a Christian is. A Christian is that you don't treat people based on what they look like. You treat people based on what they are. And that doesn't mean, well, if they're all this kind of stuff, then we don't do it. No, what it means is you treat them as what they are, and all of them were created by God, and they're worth, and they have infinite worth. They have infinite value. They have all of that stuff. It is amazing to me when you've been around and you see young people, kids, or whatever that have grown up in extreme poverty. Sometimes we've got this mentality in not just the church, but especially in affluent churches. We have, well, if they would just make the right decisions and they would just do this and they would just do that, then they could break out of that cycle of poverty and all that. And the reality is that I haven't really met anybody, unless they're older, but especially like younger people that are in that cycle, they want to get out of that cycle worse than anything. Their issue is that they just don't know how to do it. All they know is what they've ever grown up around. Okay? Survival. I mean, you go over into Pontiac, and we used to go around to the Baldwin Park area, and you could see it. It was about survival. That's what it was all about. And so it's hard. It's a lot harder for people to do that. In verse 5, he says here, "Listen, my dear brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom He promised those who love Him?" What do you think he means by that?
Well, because they trusted and depended on God, their faith is what made them rich.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when the kids were little, Mike was working like 3 and 4 jobs, and and we were still having a hard time making ends meet and stuff. And my kids would say, they came home one day and one of them said, "Mama, are we poor?" And I'm like, "No, I don't think we are." Because it just didn't feel like we were poor because we had, we had what we needed. Did we have as much as their friend that they went to school with? No, probably not. I couldn't spend $50 on a pair of shoes or jeans or, whatever. We got stuff at Goodwill and Salvation Army and, but no, I didn't feel poor because I had faith and I had trust in a God that provided for us, so.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I've known people that didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, but they had a healthier attitude about life and a greater faith in God than people that I knew that had owned companies and all that kind of stuff. Because the reality is this, and we have to understand that, I used to hear growing up that money was the root of all evil, which is a total misrepresentation of what the Scripture says. It says the love of money is the inordinate affection of money. In other words, that's all you think about is, how do I get it? How do I keep it? How do I make more of it? That will mess you up. Mm-hmm. Money, I've heard it said that money is an awesome servant, but it's a terrible master. Because all of a sudden, when your whole life is about that's how you view everything. Mm-hmm. And so James here he's talking about. He said, "Look, you need to understand that you think that it's wealthy people that are going to benefit you, but here's the reality of it: the people that are, at least that society is deemed to be poor, those people may be the best ones around simply for the fact that A, they probably got a good work ethic. Most of these people weren't bums. They worked their tails off. It's just the people that, and whether they were in agriculture or they were fishermen or they were shepherds or they were in the trades, whether they were making idols or tinsmiths or whatever the case may be, they worked their tails off for just a few nickels. They had a work ethic that was unreal. And they were constantly being used and abused by the wealthier people around them who owned them. Because once you got enslaved, once you got, I forget the exact name, an indentured servant. An indentured servant was you agreed to serve this person for a set number of years, and then at the end of that time frame, you would have paid off your indenturedness and then do it. I learned when I was in Jamestown, Virginia, which was where one of the first settlements was here in this country before the Pilgrims ever landed at Plymouth Rock. The folks from Jamestown. In fact, I learned that the first Thanksgiving didn't happen in Plymouth with the Pilgrims. The actual first Thanksgiving in this nation happened in 1619 when the Jamestown settlers first landed, and the people, the company, the people that sent them over here, the King of England passed this edict and said, for your safe passage, as soon as you get there, you are to fall on your knees and you're to thank the Creator for giving you a safe passage. And then I decree that settlement, you as a people, every year on the anniversary of when you first landed, you are to celebrate, you're to give thanks unto God for a safe passage. I never learned that in school.
No.
I never learned that. I didn't learn that until I go down there. And literally there is a stone, there's a monument down on the James River at Christmas time. My wife and I, we were just down there and we walked around and saw that here it is, there's this thing. And most of the people that came over with them were indentured servants. Okay? They weren't slaves. They were indentured servants because they came with them from England. And so what they did was that there were tradesmen because they had to have bricks made. They had to have wood cut. They had to have cedar shakes cut and put together. They had to have homes built. They had to have all this stuff. They had to be able to shoe their animals and things of that nature. So these people came over for a chance at a new life and a new place to get a new start. They said, we will work for you if you'll pay the freight for us to come over. We will work for you for this many years. And at the end of that time frame, that was the agreement. It was a contract that they had behind. They came and they worked. At the end of that time frame, they let go of that. It's interesting. In England, I didn't know you was going to get a history lesson tonight, but in England, if you were not one of the... have you ever watched Downton Abbey? Go ahead, guys. It's okay if you have. It's all right. Yeah. Hey, I loved it, man. I watched my wife and I binge watched that thing, man. It's crazy. But Downton Abbey is a really good representation because you had the ruling class and then you had the servant class. And the servant class was never able to get beyond and move up. And especially in their culture, if you were a firstborn, everything went to you. Everything. So what happened was, in most instances and in most families, the second-born or the third-born or the fourth-born or whatever was going on, what they would end up doing is they would end up taking up a trade or something or whatever because they never could get the same place. Because the firstborns got to go to college. They got to go to and become doctors and lawyers and eventually politicians and all that. But their younger siblings didn't ever get to do that. So what happened was that they began to come to this country. And what they would do is they would come here and start a life for themselves because they didn't have to deal with that hierarchy that was a part of English culture. So they would come over here and they would start their own things. And the only problem was, matter of fact, in a place called Rugby, Tennessee, was one of the first settlements of second and third born Englishmen and their wives, born into royalty, born into all that, but because they weren't firstborn, they didn't get anything. So they came over here to make a life for themselves, and they created their own settlement. The only thing was, it didn't last very long because they had been so pampered by having servants around them all the time. They didn't know how to work.
Yeah, that's right.
They didn't know how to work. So the whole thing. I've been there. I've walked the grounds. They've got that place in Tennessee has got probably one of the best libraries of antiquity, of antique books. They have got the most complete volumes of actual Civil War battlefield reports and maps. I mean, like taking up shelves and shelves. People come from all over the world to go there and study those books. I was like in heaven because I'm a Civil War freak, and so I was in there. But you see how this stuff can happen. So we're seeing the same thing here. You have the haves and the have-nots. So he's saying, look, you want to know your Christianity isn't defined by what you have. Your Christianity is defined by how you treat what other people do or don't have. How do you treat them? So he says, haven't the poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich that are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Okay? We know the story that Jesus told about the guy who owed his master, whatever, 10 grand approximately. And the guy dragged him in the court, and the guy that owed the money, he said, look, have mercy on me, I will pay everything, and all that kind of stuff, I'll do it. And so the judge cut him some slack, and he said, all right, I'm gonna let you go. The guy walks out of the court, and here comes a guy down the street that owed him $10. And he grabs the guy and pins him up against a tree and basically ready to punch his lights out because you pay me everything you owe me money. And people that had been in the court saw what happened. They went in and told the judge. And the judge had him arrested, and he said, look, man, he said, didn't I forgive your debt? Didn't you owe all this money and I forgave that debt? Shouldn't you have at least forgiven the guy that owed you a little bit of money? And then Jesus used that as an analogy, said that's how it's going to be, that we have to do it. So James here, as Jesus, where do you think James learned this whole concept? Of saying, isn't the rich that you need to treat the poor with respect. You need to treat them right. You need to do everything you can to take care of them. Where do you think James may have learned that? Think it might have been listening to his brother? Just maybe. Just maybe. So he says, you dishonor the poor. You dishonor the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? So what do we learn from this? Just these couple of verses. What do we learn from what James is saying here? And think of it in the context of how do we demonstrate our Christianity and our faith in Christ, our walk with God when it comes to the poor? How do we do that?
Just simple respect and honor of everyone, regardless of where they come from or what they do or how much they have. It's just a very simplistic honor and respect for human beings.
Loving them regardless.
Loving them regardless, having honor and treating them like, not like animals, but like human beings that are worthy of, that are worth something, I think in a little bit, I haven't spent a lot of time, but in times where in places where I was around and was able to deal with people that came from, let's just say, economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, okay? Whether it was in Jamaica, when I was down there, on a missions trip or whatever, one of the hardest thing to break off of people in that situation, they understand that Jesus loves them. They understand that Jesus died for their sins. Most of them are very religious. But the hardest thing in the world to get broken off of them is the idea of a victim mentality. That they're victims. Pardon me?
Why would you do this for me?
Yeah.
Why are you doing this?
You must have an angle. What is it you're wanting from us? And getting that to break off of people. But you know what? It's not just people from disadvantaged things. There's people that come in this place every Sunday who walk in that stuff. They walk in that same mentality. I don't deserve people to be nice to me. I don't deserve this. All kinds of stuff that we carry with us. And James is saying, look, we define poor as economically disadvantaged. And we got to understand there's a lot of emotional and spiritual disadvantaged people walking around in our churches that have gone through hell and back in their lives, and they don't think they deserve to be treated better than that. Do you know why? Do you know what the statistic is? And you know, working where you work, I know you know this, that it is not unusual for abused and battered women to go from one relationship after another that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Do you know why they do that? Because in their head, they've convinced themselves there must be something wrong with me, that I don't deserve any better than that.
They feel that's all they're worth.
And here's the deal. The Jesus you don't know is harder to deal with than the devil you do know. And what I mean by that is that you begin to build a mentality of this is all I've had, this is all I'm worth. This may not be good, but at least I know it.
Yeah.
I know it. And that is the toughest part, because I mean, hey, let's face it, y'all. We live in Rochester, we live in this area, live in Oakland County, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. And it's like there in some pockets you do have economic disadvantage and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But the reality is what's harder is that it's the emotional disadvantage that people suffer from. And as believers, God has given us not only a message, but He's given us an obligation to be able to help those people figure out you are worth so much more than what you see in the mirror. And that type of thing. So that's what He's trying to get us to. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you? Are they not the ones who are dragging you into court? Are they not the ones who are blaspheming the noble name of Him to whom you belong? Second thing, and this goes beyond even people that are from abusive situations. The hardest thing in the world for an individual to grasp in their walks with God is the idea that I am a child of God. That I am a son or daughter of God. That I don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops to experience the love of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
He loves me just the way I am. I don't have to, and that's difficult. That is so hard. Because if you grew up in a home where, and it may not have been legit, but it's what was perceived. That in order to feel loved and taken care of, you had to perform. You had to get all the right grades. You had to get all the stuff. You had to do all that kind of stuff. You grew up in that kind of a home. It is hard to walk from that into, say, a really good Christian church where people just love you, because it's like you've learned that, okay, in order to earn anything, I have to do something to earn it. Mm-hmm. And it's the hardest thing in the world to grasp, that this thing that we have of salvation in Jesus Christ, and this is what James is trying to get across here. He's saying, look, you've got an obligation to people to help them understand that when they come into the kingdom of God, they're a son or daughter immediately. They don't have to earn it. And that talks about identity. I was talking to somebody just before we got started. We were talking about that, and the subject of identity came up. That is huge. That is huge. Because I guarantee you, if I just started off tonight and just went around and asked everybody, tell me something about yourself. And this is especially true of men. Usually the first thing they're going to tell you is what they do. Well, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I own my own business. And they tell you that because in our society, what you do determines in many ways where you fit in the hierarchy. What you do. So we bring that with us into church. And we bring that with us into our relationship with God. That's why this book gets so misinterpreted. Because if you come in with that kind of mentality, you're going to automatically think, well, I've got to do this stuff in order. James says, I got to do this stuff, because if I don't do it, then and that's not what James is trying to communicate. What he's trying to communicate is that, no, you don't do that stuff to earn the love of God, because you have the love of God. It changes the way you view the world around you, and it changes how you minister to people and how you treat people.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing. It says, if you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing right. Now, what's the if you go back into the Gospels, what's the verse, the sentence previous to this, love your neighbor as yourself?
Love the Lord your God with their heart, soul, and mind.
Love the Lord your God with our heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's exactly right. This is the first and great commandment. And then Jesus says, but the second
This is like the same.
is just like it, meaning it is of equal importance.
And it comes from the first one.
Yes.
If you got the first one, that's automatically going to flow out of you.
It should be. It should. It should. That's exactly right. So you can begin to see, James isn't telling you, well, you need to do all these works in order to be good enough to be a Christian. No, what he's saying, he says, no, because you are already good enough to be a Christian, this is what should be flowing out of you. Okay? That's where he's going with that. So he says it's the royal law, love your neighbor as yourself, you're doing right, but if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. You go back into the Old Testament, back into the law, and God demonstrates from the very beginning, he had a huge heart for the poor and the outcasts and the widows and the orphans. Even to the point where it was woven into their culture. They were an agrarian culture, raised animals and farmed. But God mandated that if you had a field, you come harvest time. You didn't say you have a square field. You did not harvest that field as a square. You harvested it as a giant circle. Because what that did was, if you take a perfect square and you draw a circle in the middle of it, you'll find out that it leaves 4 corners. God said that's how you harvest your field. You leave the rest for the widow, the poor, the orphan, all of those people. And not so that you harvest it and then you give it to them. That's where we mess up in our all of our social justice stuff. We want to give people things.
Yeah.
Rather than allowing them, so they can come and they can glean and
Sense of accomplishment.
Exactly. A sense of accomplishment, the value of work. I mean, let's face it. Wouldn't it be great if God really did put Adam and Eve in a garden and just said, hey guys, kick back, get your chase lounges out, grab some lemonade and just chill. I got this covered. You guys are all good.
No.
He didn't. The first thing he told them, he said, all of this I've given you, but I've given you, you're to tend it. You're to take care of it. In other words, I've made you stewards of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole concept, there is a sense of pride that comes from working. There's a sense of pride that comes from earning your own way. There's a sense of pride of doing that. I read a book one time, it was called Compassionate Conservatism. It was a book quite a while back, and what it was about a guy that went into the inner city of New York, and he developed this, he was a wealthy guy, but he developed a foundation, and what he would do is he would take young men, get them, whether they were just recently paroled or whatever the case may be, or gotten in trouble with the law, he would go and before the judge, and he would say, Judge, I'll take care of them, put them into my... And what he did was, he didn't give them anything. He gave them a place to stay, but they had to work. And he taught each one of them a trade. And he taught them self-reliance, and he taught them how to take care of their money, how to be good stewards, and how to not look for handouts, but to earn what you get. And it totally changed. I mean, it was a big thing. It was one of the biggest, at that time, it was one of the biggest self-help, if you will, agencies that were around, and it was unbelievable. The number of men, that there were men that would come through that, and they would end up being CEOs and executives of companies, not because they had all this brilliance, but because somebody fostered and put a sense of, okay, here you go. You want that? You really want? How bad do you want it?
Get some blisters.
Start working. You got to work. You got to work for it. Don't expect handouts. And the reality is, that's the way God set it up right from the very beginning. Adam and Eve wasn't sitting there getting a handout. They had to tend the garden. They had to take care of the garden. They had everything, all they could have. And we see that all throughout Scripture. The idea, Paul says, if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. That principle is all through there. So what it's saying that here's the deal. Part of the things that he is saying here is that he's saying, look, you represent the kingdom. Right? You represent the kingdom. And as a kingdom representative, there are certain things that should be expected of you. That's why God told them, when you harvest your fields, don't harvest them all the way to the edges. You leave some of it so that they can come and harvest. Why? Because it builds a sense of accomplishment. You don't end up with this handout mentality. Okay? That's why it's not even a political point of view, but that's why I tend to have a conservative point of view. Because conservatism teaches you work hard, you work for what you have. Don't expect the government or anybody else to give you handouts. Okay?
Sure.
Yeah, Dave?
I agree to that.
You know, it's just, you can't do that. So he's saying, look, love your neighbor as yourself, but if you show favoritism, whatever, whoever keeps the whole law, verse 10, and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all the law. Man, that's harsh. That's harsh. Or is it?
I think it's fair.
In whose eyes?
Not the one who breaks the law, part of the law. Probably doesn't seem fair at all. But I did all of this, but I missed this part.
Yeah. See, because here's the deal. What we fail to see, and if you go into verse 11, James says, "For he who said, 'You shall not commit adultery,' also said, 'You shall not murder.'" So even if you don't commit adultery, but you commit murder, you're still a lawbreaker. So even if you don't break this law down here, there's a code of law. So even if that's well, man, I only did that. Why are you calling me a name like that? I'm not a lawbreaker. Did you break a law? Well, yeah, kind of, sort of, but it was
one.
Yeah, just one, or just an itty bitty one. No, what a big one.
Pastor, I stressed it. I stressed the law a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I that too, yeah.
Yeah, I stress. It really isn't a law, not like. But what he's saying is this. He's saying, look, he said, you got to understand something. That it doesn't matter how big it is or how small it is. If you break a law, you're a lawbreaker, regardless. I mean, tell the person, and I'm standing here, I'm talking to myself right here. Tell the person that's doing 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. But I'm not breaking the law. Everybody else is doing it.
Yeah.
What's the speed limit? 40 miles an hour. How fast were you going? 50. But everybody else, no, you are a lawbreaker. Oh, come on, I'm not a lawbreaker. Come on, really? Are you kidding? No, according to James, that's so he even and it's amazing how you can justify that stuff, isn't it? You rationalize it, Officer, I'm sorry, officer, but I was in a big hurry. I'm running late, and I had to get home. My kid, everybody's got a kid. I got to get home for my kid, and I actually had a cop let me off here right on Snell Road. My daughter, who's special needs, my wife had to go. She had a doctor's appointment or something, so I had to get there in time to get her off of the bus. Otherwise, she would have sat on the bus and rode it all night long. At that point in time, she just wouldn't do anything, so I had to be there. And so I'm going down. I'm running late, which was my fault, and I'm flying down Snell Road over here. And all of a sudden, here it comes out of one of the neighborhoods over here across the street. Whoop! Here comes the lights. Oakland County pulls me over. And where are you coming from?
Church. The church. Where I work.
The church. Really? What you doing there?
I'm a pastor there.
I'm a pastor. You're a pastor. You know what the speed limit is here? I said, yes, sir, 40. He said, yes, it is. You know how fast I clocked you at? I said, I learned, never tell him. I said, well, officer, you clocked me. He said, you were doing 50 miles an hour in a 40 zone, and it's residential. And I said, I'm sorry. He said, and I said, I'm sorry, officer. I said, I got a special needs daughter at home. I mean, I was breaking down. I was trying to play the heartstring card. Officer, I'm sorry. I got a special needs daughter at home. My wife had to leave, and I said, she's getting home on the bus, and I said, I just blew it and everything. And he said, oh, okay. He said, well, hang on a second. And I'm thinking, he's going to let me off. He walked back and handed me that ticket. He said, I suggest maybe you leave a little earlier so you could drive on the speed limit. Have a great day.
Ooh.
You know? But the reality was, it didn't matter what my excuse was. I broke a law.
Isn't there a principle, like, I can't think what it is, but if you, like, you break one, like it says in here, you break one law, you're more likely than to do something more serious, or if you're willing to bend the rules or whatever in this situation, then something else could be greater or bigger. Sin is sin, but, you know, and then you're more likely.
Yeah, it's called escalation. Because you get the idea, well, I got away with this, so that means I can do a little bit more the next time. And it feeds on itself.
Yeah.
And that's in all areas of life, right? I mean, how many of you, well, I'm looking around, I'm probably the only one that's done the dieting thing. You know, how many of you, you blow your diet and you get on the scale the next day and you find out, oh, dude, that wasn't bad, it's just a quarter of a pound. That's all right. So the next day comes along, and well, shoot, I ate more than this yesterday, and I only gained a quarter of a pound. You know, and you it's an escalation. You keep moving the boundary line until finally 2 days later, that stuff you ate that first day finally hits you, and you're up no half pound, you're up 5 pounds in 2 days. You know, or whatever the case may be. And so we rationalize and we try to justify it. That's why he's saying, speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom. Wow. Because there is a law that gives freedom. It's the law of Christ. It's the law of love. It's the law of forgiveness. It's the law of treating people the right way. So act in such a way, speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom. Because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Wow. Mercy always triumphs over judgment. That's a hard one. Because when people lash out at you and people hurt you, what is your first inclination? To lash back, to hurt back. And usually we don't want to hurt to the same degree. We want to just hurt them just a little bit more.
Yes.
You know? So the idea here is that, which is totally a Jesus thing, with the mercy. Where do you think James learned that? The idea that mercy triumphs over judgment. Judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. So he's saying that one of the hallmarks of Christianity as believers is that you need to be the most merciful people around. That's a hard one. Because it's a very fine line between showing somebody mercy and allowing people to step on you time and time again. It's very, very difficult. I wish I could stand and say I got it all figured out, but I don't. You know, it's tough, but yet James says that's got to be a hallmark of your Christian walk. Now notice, once again, he doesn't say by doing this you're a Christian. He says if you're a Christian, this should be the hallmarks of your life. This should be what's going on. You know, so mercy triumphs over judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. That verse gives me pause. Because even though I do my very best to live for Jesus, I find out I blow it every day, multiple times a day. And the reality is that how many times have other people blown it with us and we haven't shown them mercy?
Mm-hmm.
I'll raise my hand. And the reality is, and what James is actually saying, he's saying, look, here's the deal. It'll be, you know, the whatever you measure out will be measured back to you again. You know, that's that principle and that Jesus taught about. You know, whatever you judge not, lest you be judged. For with the same measure that you meted out, it will be meted back to you. It will be pulled back on you again. And that's hard. That's real hard. Because the first time somebody does something to you, your immediate reaction is to want to lash out. You want to lash out. And that is very, very difficult. Especially when you happen to be in a season of your life where you're going through some difficult situations, you hate your job, you're trying to, the stinking corona won't leave, or COVID won't leave you, coronavirus, yeah, COVID, won't leave you alone.
That's the name of it.
Yeah.
There you go, bud.
My niece, it was her birthday yesterday, and I said, hey, happy birthday, hope you're having a great day. She said, it's not, I got the Rona. So it's, everything, it's amazing how that these past 2 years have seen, in some ways it's seen the very best brought out in some people, and in other ways it's seen the very worst brought out in people. And a lot of it has to do with everybody's on a very high-pitched, just this attitude of we're at this place where just the least little thing can set you off. And that idea is that James, what he's saying here, he's saying you need to be very careful about that, because with whatever measure you give it out, it's going to come back on you.
Think about mercy. When you're merciful, you sleep so much better at night.
Oh yeah,
You
yeah,
have much better night's sleep.
yeah. Or if and here's the thing: how many of you? Okay, maybe you don't. I do. I replay stuff in my mind over and over again.
I do. Yep.
And that's a real issue for me. And I talk to myself as I'm doing it. So I'll get out of the shower in the morning and Tammy goes, who were you talking to this morning? And it seriously, it got to be pretty bad. And just till finally, I'll just be honest with you, I went and saw a counselor this past year between my father dying, my wife's mother dying, dealing with both of those illnesses and all that, all of this other junk going on around me. I mean, it was like, I had a hair trigger, and it didn't matter who it was with. And finally I figured out, I said, okay, I gotta, excuse me, I gotta get some help with this. So I went to a Christian counselor, and it was the best thing I ever done. Because me being a man, I don't need no stinking counselor. I did. And he helped me to see some things that I had surmised in the back of my mind, but I just left them there. I never did anything with them, but he helped me to be able to process some of that stuff. And it was the best thing in the world for me. Because what I was able to do, I was able to sleep at night. I was able not to talk to myself and have arguments with myself, supposedly with the people that I was angry with. Excuse me. So, all of that stuff is huge. And our district superintendent gave all the pastors recently at a conference, he gave us all a book. It's called How's Your Soul? Written by Judah Smith, Pastor Judah Smith. Excellent book. And it deals with that whole subject of our soul, which your soul is that part of your emotions and that whole thing that, because you can be physically well, you can even think you're spiritually well, but if your soul's sick, it's going to be a house of cards. And you've got to make sure that, and the book of Proverbs says, even as a man's soul prospers, so shall he prosper. In other words, that's the seed of all your emotions, your feelings, and everything else. Matter of fact, it's interesting that I never really saw it in this light, where in the book of Genesis, where it says, and God breathed into man, and man became a living soul. So what that means to me is that we think about it spiritually, your soul, saved your soul. Well, reality is that our soul is our it's that emotional makeup of us that carries so much weight with us. If you're having a bad day, you generally will end up taking it out on other people, in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. Whether it's your spouse, whether it's your kids, whether it's somebody at work, you will end up taking it. And what happens as soon as you do that is you regret it. You feel bad. And so then you spend all day and then the enemy jumps all over that. He jumps on that like a duck on a June bug, and all of a sudden now the enemy is hammering you, see, and you call yourself a Christian?
Yeah.
You call yourself a good person, and look at what you did. You realize how badly you hurt them, and you want nothing more than to be able to take that word away. Have you ever, those of you that have kids, have you ever gotten angry and yelled at your kids, and as soon as the words left your mouth, you could see the hurt just come over them in their eyes and in their face? And you wished nothing more. I wished I could take it back. And you can't.
Sure.
When you get to that point where that's happening on a regular basis, I would dare say that that's a good indication. That's one of the first symptoms of having a sick soul. And so we have to be able, and James is what he's trying to say, is that, look, mercy is something that you've got to be able to show mercy. You're not able to show mercy to other people until you're able to show it to yourself. Not really. Because actually, probably everybody in here, I know it's my issue. My counselor helped me understand this. It's like I'm on a bus. I'm supposed to be driving, but there's this voice at the back of the bus who's trying to tell me how to drive all the time. And only I have the ability to tell that voice to shut up. My wife and I will be in a discussion or whatever, and I get quiet, and she'll go, "You're starting to shut down again." This happened when we were away for a little bit. And I said, "No, I'm not shutting down. I'm just trying to get that voice at the back of my bus to shut up." That has helped me immensely. Because what it does is it helps me, that voice is trying to disrupt my soul, which is the seat of what makes me, when it says that God breathed into man and made him a living soul. When we take Christ into our lives, it's like we have been made alive. We have become new creations. We're alive in Christ. And so that's a huge thing for me, right? As a matter of fact, our life group was going through that book. We're going to go through it and dissect that because it's got some really good stuff in it. And so this whole thing of mercy is born when you have a good relationship with here, and I don't mean your heart, I mean with your inner man, your soul. When that's right, it's amazing how much easier it is to have mercy with somebody and to show them mercy. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times we don't show mercy. That was not intended. I'm going down this road there, but a lot of times the reason we don't show mercy to people is because we want other people to hurt as bad as we're hurting. We want people to it's almost like we have this attitude. What right do you have to be so daggum happy? You don't have that right. So you did something, you did this, you did that, and it's just ridiculous. But judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And here's the deal, that also means it triumphs in your own inner self. Okay? If you want to be able to be merciful to others, you got to give yourself some slack. You got to cut yourself a little bit of slack. You got to be able to, Ryan, take everybody. You got to be able to be merciful with yourself. And so that's what James is saying. And it's interesting, he ties it all into this thing of if you're a Christ follower, if you're a follower of Jesus, God desires you to be healthy, but in order to be healthy emotionally and spiritually in the depth of your soul, you're going to have to be able to show yourself some mercy, to cut yourself some slack, because you will not be able to show it to other people until you can show it to yourself. Because what happens is, if you do try to show it to other people, you become resentful. Man, I can't believe I cut that down some slack, and I can't even cut myself some slack. What's going on with me? So there's all kinds of different things that are in that. Let's go on. Verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? It's another good one that has always, at least growing up, was always turned around. Where? Well, that just means, and this is one of the reasons why James or Martin Luther didn't want James included in the Gutenberg Bible. He said it because it's all about works and all that kind of, and if you read this cursory glance, you see that. But now what he's really saying is this: if you have faith, you will have deeds. It'll be borne out by what you do. It'll be borne out by how you treat people. It'll be borne out by all these different things. Suppose a brother or sister, verse 15, is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it?
It's
I don't
like-
know. Go.
Sorry.
No, go.
It's like we, as a church, and I remember sharing this with my youth group, that the church has all these, all these don't do's. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. And I shared with them this, is that once you have faith, once you have a love for Jesus, you're not gonna want to do this. You're not gonna want to do that. And it's not a matter of you can't do this, you can't do that. It's a matter of out of your love, out of your faith in Christ, you're not gonna want to do these things that displease Him or that are against His nature. You're not gonna want to do them.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. There was a movie out a few years ago, and it was on the life of Charles Dickens when he wrote A Christmas Story. Or not A Christmas Story.
A Christmas Carol.
There you go, Christmas Carol, thank you. When he wrote that, and it was all about where that in England, in London, they were going through some serious economic times, hard times, and the welfare system could not handle what was going on. They really didn't have one. Couldn't handle all of the people that were being kicked out of their homes. The poor houses were filled. It's kind of like the scene from A Christmas Carol where they're trying to get Ebenezer Scrooge to make a donation. And he comes back, what, are there no poorhouses? Are there no institutions? And they said, well, yes, they're all in full vigor. And he says, well, then let them go there and leave me alone. And there was such an attitude of that in London, and there was such economic hard times, that Charles Dickens, who was about to go broke, wrote this book, which is all about the whole thing of the true meaning of Christmas is in the giving. In other words, what it's really about, it's about people allowing the story of the birth of Christ to bring a new lease on life and to be willing to show themselves some mercy so they could show it to others. When that book came out, it was such a huge blockbuster that literally it was said that one book, that charitable giving in London, I forget what the amount was, multiplied exponentially because of that book. It was the best-selling book at that particular moment in time in the history of when Charles Dickens wrote it. Of course, he wrote, the one about, please, sir, could I have some more? I forget the title of that one, but he wrote all these different books, but that one book was, and it was geared, they even mentioned this, it was geared in part by this verse, about, go your way, be warm and fed, go to the institutions, let them feed you, and all this kind of stuff. It had a lot to do with his motivation for writing that book, that story. And it literally changed the city of London. One guy. Think about it. If one guy, and I have no idea if Charles Dickens was a Christian, I'm sure he was a religious man, but the reality, if an author writing one book about how the true meaning of Christmas in the way that he saw it, and being able to look back over his life, seeing all of that, if one story could change a city, think about what would happen if individual Christians and groups of Christians and church, and I'm so thankful for this church, because this church is very generous to a lot of different causes and people that we help and different things. But just think about that. We've got a choice to either tell them to go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but if you don't do anything about their physical needs, what good is it? The fact is this, once again, this is a demonstration of really what's going on inside of our hearts. You show me somebody that's stingy with their money, and I'm not talking about being frugal. I'm talking about being so stinking tight they squeak when they walk. And how that they don't have a generous spirit about them. It's kind of like the story that Jesus told of the guy that was raising grain, and he filled his barns, and he filled them all up, and he still had grain. He said, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my old barns, and I'll build bigger barns.
Yeah.
The story goes that Jesus said, "You fool," and that night his soul was required of him. He didn't get this, so it's like there's an aspect. One of the chief, and I remember Shane Willard used to be so big on this. One of the chief aspects of your Christian walk is how generous are you?
Yes.
How generous are you? And generosity isn't just about giving out money. Generosity can be shown in a lot of different ways, and having that generous spirit. So that's kind of where it's at. Yeah, Dave?
Pastor, I asked, like you said, it's a giving, right? Like I give, say, $500, but then Betty Sue over the wherever gives $500, and like that's her whole life savings. So that's a drop in the bucket for me. So it's not what it is. It's what. Not so much a loss, but a sacrifice.
Yeah. It's easy to give out of your abundance. It's something else to give out of a place of need. You have a need and you give it away.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, and this is just something that really stuck in my mind. We'll end with this. When I first got married the first time, wasn't making a lot of money. I was working at General Motors, but in that day it wasn't that great of money. Working at General Motors, my wife, she had a job working for an air freight company that as a clerical person. So we were doing okay, but we didn't have that much. Well, there was one Wednesday night we were in youth group, and we were just kind of helping the youth pastor at the time. We were helping him, and I was doing junior high ministry and things like that for him. And one Wednesday night, he pulled me into his office, and it was getting toward the end of the month. And what that means is we didn't have. I had just enough money in my pocket to fill. My car needed gas to get some gas in my car. This is going to tell you how long ago it was. I had $10 and it would have filled my tank up. Okay, so it was a while ago, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and he called me into his office, and there was a couple there. They were adult youth leaders, but they were really having a rough time financially, and they didn't have anything. I mean, they were hurting, and bills were stacking up, and he just said, "Hey," he said, "they're really hurting." He said, "I want to do something for them. Is there, he said, I've got this much. Have you got anything you can give?" And I'm thinking to myself, I'm fighting with God. I'm saying, "Lord, I got to get home." And that $10 is going to get me home and get me to my job the next day. Like I said, I worked afternoons. I would go to the church and kind of an internship, which is another way of saying it was unpaid. I did an internship during the day, and I was working at night. And I $10, that was it. But the Holy Spirit, I mean, it was just like any one of you were sitting here whispering in my ear saying, "Do you trust me?" Well, do you trust me? Yeah. Give him $10. But God, give him the $10. I took it out, and I grabbed the 10 out, and I gave it to my youth pastor, and then he called them into his office, and we gave them, and they broke down in tears, and all that, and we had prayer with them that God would bless them and all that. So I go out, get ready to leave, and my wife's with me, and we're getting ready to leave the church, and this lady comes up to me, an older lady, and she said, "Pastor Kelvin, I'm glad I caught you." And I said, "Okay, what's up?" And she goes, "Well," she says, "you guys gracious, you didn't even know me, but you invited me to your wedding." And she says, "And I wasn't able to go." She said, and she opens her purse up. She said, I got a little something for you as a wedding gift." So she hands us this card. We get out in the car and open it up, and it was $20. And my wife and I, we just sat there and started crying because it was like
It was God.
it was God. It was a God thing. And what I'm saying is this: you're not charitable because you're going to get something for it. You're charitable because it's a part of your character. It's because of what Jesus was.
Amen.
And it's amazing that when you
Love that.
walk in that, how that God supernaturally provides that.
Yeah.
Takes care of his own.
And so James is saying, look, he's saying, this is the deal. You when you see someone in need, you know, you can say you got faith all you want, but if you don't have if the rubber doesn't meet the road, really, can that faith save you? Jesus gave all for you. And that's what he's trying to communicate. Listen, guys, I know you're in a rough spot. I know Rome is squeezing you tighter than anything. I know that they're trying to kill you. I know that they're rounding up Christians and killing them. But I'm telling you, you have to still demonstrate the life of Christ. And it's going to be okay. And so I'm going to stop there with that, and we'll jump back into this. But James, I used to hate reading because I was like, dude, this is such a downer. But when I began to see it for what it was, and it was, this isn't how you become a Christian. This is what it looks like to be a Christian. It changes things. So with that, I'm gonna let us go tonight. So appreciate your guys' input. It was good. Thank you for at home watching us. I hope this has been a blessing to you. And come on back next week. We'll continue on with James. Okay? God bless you. Have a great night, everybody. Have a good one. Adios. Have a good evening.